Hello, and this is Professor Swanee with MGD 141. Today we're going to start with cascading style sheets. So if you're in the print world, you're probably used to having the page and all the things on the page right there. And you select them and then you change them. You change the color, you change the size, you change the font type right there on the page. With web, it's different. Maybe if you're used to a program called InDesign, where you work with paragraph styles and character styles, maybe you're familiar with here is the content, and then we style it over here. So it does take a little getting used to in the web world, but that's essentially what our style sheet does. All right, so let's go ahead, and if you don't have the files open already, I'm not sure why I can't get out of my video. Come on. There we go. I just had to hide my own thing. So if you're in the D2L, you can download the last class files. And here they are. And we're going to go back to our About page. We're going to open that up first in Dreamweaver. Should look like this. So the very first thing we're going to need to do is create a style sheet. All right, so we have our About page open, but we don't have it styled anyway. So come up here to Dreamweaver, we'll create new, and then we have CSS as our document type. Go ahead and hit create. And here is our blank document. Now before I start filling any styles in, we're going to place this in our folders. So with File, Save As, we find our website project folder, and we're going to create a new folder. The button on the Mac is down here at the bottom at this point. And we will go call it CSS with lowercase letters. Create that file or that folder. The name of our CSS file is going to be style. Now you can do styles or style. I'll use styles since it seems to make sense, and that's typically what you'll see it called. But since we can have more than one style sheet per website, you may want to have one that is more descriptive, but we're only going to have one for this entire website, so this is going to work just fine. And you go ahead and hit save. And I'm getting a little spinning window. Come on, you can do this. There we go. So now I have two files open next to each other. The way we get our style sheet to link into our index page is to write a certain code in our head tags. Alright? So for this, I'm going to go ahead and put this right below, let's see, do I want to put it above my title, below my title? I guess it doesn't really matter since I've got meta tags right here. Well, I'll put it below my title. It doesn't really totally matter, but we need to create a link to another reference. All right? And we have an href. That tells us where to go find it. And then there's some other stuff we have to put in, some other tags to let the browsers know what this link is. So we've told it we have another file you need to take a look at, and here it is. And by the way, here's what it is and in the type of format that it is. So our type of style sheet is going to be text CSS, which is typically what it's going to be. I'm not even sure when you would use anything else. So we're telling our HTML page, the web browser, hey, we're going to link to another file. href is going to say, here's where it is. And by the way, this is what it is. And what format that file is and why we're using it. Okay, and we're going to, again, since we're on the About page, we need to look up one folder with our relative URL. It's going to be in the CSS folder, and we called it styles.css. Just like that. One thing I should try to do, maybe in my preferences, I'm not sure if I'm going to figure out where this is. I'm going to pause this and see if I can make this a little bigger. Okay, I found a little preference setting that should make this a little bigger on your video, so you can see what I'm typing in here for code. The only drawback is when it's this size, it's obviously my lines are going to wrap sooner. So that doesn't necessarily mean that I've put in a return. So I hope everyone can keep that in check. But I'm hoping making this a little bigger will make it easier to see on your video. Okay, so this links our style sheet to our HTML page. Notice that until I save, I always get that asterisk next to my file name tab. So I'll go ahead and hit save. Now, as soon as I attach something to my index page, notice what happens in Dreamweaver. They put the source code and the styles sheet in sort of like this mini menu tab right here. What that means is if I'm on that index page, I can go right straight to my style sheet. It's the same as this. And it lets me go back and forth between the two files. So when you open an HTML page now that has a style sheet attached to it in Dreamweaver, it automatically also opens your style sheet because it knows you're going to go between those quite a bit. So I can actually close this styles tab and start editing right here. Okay? All right, so let's go ahead and look at some of the things that we're going to do. Link that into the HTML page. We're going to go ahead and change some color. Now in the web world, we use what's called hexadecimal color. If you've done print, you're probably used to RGB, you're probably used to CMYK, maybe grayscale. And in the web world, we can use RGB. We can even use a color source called RGBA, which includes an alpha. And then there's some just names of colors we can use, red, yellow, blue. Although those are really stark and ordinary, I'd say you use those sparingly. And then if we want a lot of choices in web colors, we use hexadecimal color, where you get an option. Let me just draw this out a little bit for you. Text edit. So with hexadecimal colors, you've got a full range, and you're basically going to use the letters A through F, and you're going to use the numbers 0 through 9. Being that anything that is all F's is going to be white, so that's the extreme of how far you can go with the letters. And if you went the other extreme with everything being zeros, that's going to be your darkest black. And anything that where you have a repeat is going to be some form of gray. So if I did all 6s, it's going to be some medium gray in there somewhere. If I did EF, 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 it's going to be that's probably going to be your lightest possible gray. And as long as you've got them in 3s, little packages of 3s, then it's going to keep it at some form of gray. Also, and it doesn't matter if it's capital letters or lowercase, it doesn't. Typically, I do everything in lowercase, so maybe I should have done that in this exercise. Sorry about that. But it doesn't matter. It's going to read it just fine. Now in our style sheet, we always have to start everything with a £sign when we're going to designate a color. So if I had FF9933, which is sort of a gold yellow, that's what that would look like. and that's the hexadecimal color. Also, if you know, there's a code shortcut. Like let's say if I wanted black, I can just do 000. And this is going to be the same as if I did 6 zeros. I guess it's just meant to save you some keystrokes. Also, anytime we designate a style, we have to end it with a semicolon. So there's going to be some things that are a little bit different with cascading style sheet coding that we don't do on our HTML page. So that's a quick lesson, and then there's a whole gamut of colors that you can use where you're mixing up A through F and 0 through 9 for all 6 digits. Alright, so the first thing we're going to go ahead and we're going to stylize a few things. And let's go ahead and let's do our H elements. Alright, so in our H elements, those are our heading tags. We're going to, on our style sheet, start off with H1. So this is called a selector. We're selecting an HTML element. In the D2L area, you've got links to this page called W3 Schools CSS. And it is a place where you can learn all about the selectors and CSS, what kind of things you can change. And here is there's a reference to all the properties you can change, and this is a list to all the selectors you can change. And there's a difference between selectors, pseudo selectors, and classes, and this sort of walks you through it all. But if you ever wanted to know what all could be selected, this helps you out. It's a good reference to have bookmarked in your reference, and they do a pretty good job of keeping it up to date. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is change my H1 tag, and this is just how the code works. We put in the selector with a space, and then we use this squiggly bracket. The squiggly bracket is right next to your P key, and you would have to probably hold shift to create that character. This starts your styles for that H tag. I also include the close squiggly bracket, style bracket. Let's call it a style bracket, open style bracket, close style bracket. Squiggly isn't probably the technical term for it. Alright, so the first thing I want to change is going to be the font size. And for our website, we're going to make everything 36 pixels. So it's 36px with a semicolon. So here we go. Here's our selector. You then need a colon. Then go ahead and give it a value, and then end it with a semicolon. And we've now given that a style. Now I don't know how much this is going to change my page yet. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. I'm going to view it before I make my change. So hope this doesn't take too long. But in the world of web, pixels is our unit of measure. We're not going to be doing things in inches or millimeters. We do everything in pixels. Now later in our styles, we're going to learn how to work with ems and percentages. And that will definitely change how things work a little bit on how you think about size. Alright, my computer's dragging just a little bit today. Come on. Need this to open up. Okay. Looks like it opened up here. I'm not sure why I got this second window. Alright, here we go. So our H1 tag is right here, I think. About Philo, the webcomic. Let me just view my source here. H1, H1. Is this my head tag? No, should be there anyway. Got an article. Not exactly sure what I called that. Have my nav, here's my section ID. Okay, so I do have an H1 tag right here. I'm kind of surprised it's showing up that small, but let's see what happens after I save it. So I'm going to save my style, come back to my browser, and now it's 36 pixels. All right, so we just changed the size, pretty simple. And that was our H1 tag. Let's also change the line height. And on this one, well, never mind. We'll do that one later, maybe in a different class. So let's go ahead and change our H2. In our H2, we have a font size. And on this one, let's go just a little bit smaller. Doesn't really, let's go 30 pixels. Generally, as you change your subheadings, you'll make them smaller as you go. So I hit save. We can go ahead and see what that does. I'm getting a little dizzy here on my web browser. Let's close my inspector. Here was an H2 tag. Let's see if it changed the size much. Yeah, a little bit bigger than the default styles. So up until the time we change this, the web browser has been using its own default style for size. All right, so that's what we wanted to change. We have to override the default font size that it had for an H2 and an H1. Let's keep on going. We'll do one more heading, do an H3 tag. Now the way that I'm doing this, formatting this, is purely for my visual organization. Again, the website could care less if you have these spaces and returns. You could run this all on one line and it would work just fine, but it would be hard to come back and manage later. Go 24 pixels. Always remember your colon and always remember your semicolon. Quite often in style sheets, when things aren't working, the very first thing you can look for is, do I have all of the formatting right? Dreamweaver does a good job at coloring your selector blue, and then it's got a property in sort of this pink, and then the value of that property is going to be in yellow. If you're not seeing that color combination, something's off. Maybe you forgot a close bracket. Maybe you forgot a semicolon. Maybe you used an equal sign instead of a semicolon or a colon. All right? So these are the things you can always go back and check. So we've changed our H3 tag. I think my tip jar was an H3 tag. So that's now changed its size. All right, so those are our first styles. Not too bad. Now if I wanted to change a style that applied to more than one element at a time, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to place these above the ones I just created. Now we're going to change H1, H2, H3, and let's go ahead and do an H4 just in case. By putting commas between the selectors, I'm now going to change, this is going to style all these selectors at the same time. So let's go ahead and change this font family. That's one of the properties that we can change. Dreamweaver gives us this kind of handy little drop down of ones that we can use. Now supposedly these are fonts that are on almost all computers, so we are pretty safe picking these. I'm going to go ahead and choose Impact for now and double click on that, and it puts it in there for me. So that was sort of a cheat with Dreamweaver instead of writing this all out. So it put in the value for me. I'm going to go ahead and put a space in there. You don't have to have that space there, but since I'm creating consistency, and then make sure I close that with a semicolon. All right, so with the fonts, we have this thing called a font family. And the way this works is we're essentially telling the web browser we want the Impact web font. And then by having a family of choices after it, it's essentially saying these are the plan B, C, D, and E if you don't have these fonts. So if the computer does not have Impact, then it needs to look for Hottenschweiler. I think I pronounced that right. If it doesn't have that one, then look for Franklin Gothic Bold. If it doesn't have that one, put in Arial Black. If not that, hey, whatever your default sans serif font is, use that. Right, so this is, instead of just choosing one, we're trying to control what it's going to look like in case they don't have these fonts on their system fonts. And this relies on them having those fonts on their computer. If the font name is just one word, you can just put the font name. If your font name has more than one word, in this case Franklin Gothic Bold, you need to put it in either double quotes or single quotes. Dreamweaver likes to put everything in double quotes, but if you ever see single quotes, that works also. So you could put these in single quotes. I'm just telling you ahead of time, Dreamweaver may change that automatically on you and put those in double quotes, but either one works. On the quote, make sure if you've got a comma that the comma is actually outside the quote. I know when we write sentences and you have a comma and a quote, usually the quote goes after the comma, so you literary English majors out there, for our web styles, we're going to put the quote or double quote inside the comma. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this and take a look at that. And it should change what was Times New Roman here into Impact. Refresh, there we go. Now all of our heading tags are using Impact. Kind of cool, huh? Let's do just a little bit more. Maybe I don't like the black. So right now the default color of my heading is something I really don't care for. So I'm going to choose a different color. Just type in color, colon. Here's where I need my pound sign. I'm just going to use, let's see, let's go ahead. I'm just trying to think. Now it brings up Dreamweaver brings up a little color wheel, and you're certainly welcome to use this. But I'm going to stick with something actually that's still pretty dark. And I'm just going to go with 222. And that would be the same as if I wrote 6 2s. All right, it's still a pretty dark gray, but it's not absolutely black. So when I change this and I refresh, maybe you can watch if the black gets just a little lighter. Yeah, barely. So it's still pretty dark. All right, but just to illustrate the point, I could make this a lot lighter. I could make this CCC, and just to illustrate what this does, see how light that makes the gray. But that's too light for me. I'm going to bring that back to a 222. There we go. Now it's a pretty dark black, but it's not pitch black. All right, let's see, what else do we need to change? Trying to look at my online notes. All right, so now we're going to change the color of our paragraphs. So after my H3s, I'm going to change my paragraphs. But we're not going to do that with the paragraph tag, actually. This is going to be better if we do this with what's called body. So let's give ourselves a couple lines of return in front of the H1 tag, and I'm going to control the color of all fonts inside the body. Change color. I'm going to choose just a slightly darker gray. Now, why body? Why didn't I do paragraphs? Well, I could do paragraphs, but then if I had parts that weren't in paragraphs, it wouldn't get included. By doing body, then everything in my style sheet is going to have this color for the font, for the text, until I override it with another style. So in this case, everything's going to have this 444, including heading tags, until it comes into this cascaded style. So because I put this body style above my H styles, then the H styles are going to override body. If I had put body down below, then it would go back to doing 444. That's the cascading. And that's because we have heading tags nested inside body tags on our HTML page. So if we go back to our index, you can see here's our tag for body, and we have an H1 tag nested inside of it. So that's how it's going to work. If I have any of these tags nested inside a body, then these will change. Alright, so it's very important that you get the order of this right. If I had this down lower, this would have been the color, but then I came back and I changed it with my cascading style. So everything descends from the top down here. So let's go ahead and save this. Oh, by the way, if you have, just for good contrast with reading, if you have a light background, it's good to have a fairly dark text, but notice how this is just a slightly lighter gray. Maybe to the quick eye you're still saying that's black, but it's actually a gray that's easier to read. If you always have real stark text on a white background, it actually gets hard to read and it's hard on the eyes. So it's good to lighten it just a bit, but you don't want it so light that it becomes really hard to read and too faint. So I usually, if I have a white or a very light background, sometimes a light gray, I will use a style color of either 333, 444, or 555. If you use those three colors for your main body text on all your websites, you're going to be just fine. It'll be a real easy read. All right? And you'll be passing accessibility and everything. Now, if I had a light gray background, I might choose the 333 just to get even more contrast and make it darker. So it's going to be your preference. But 333 to 555 I find to be a good range for body text color on light backgrounds. All right, so we've changed the body. The other thing that we can do is we can change certain elements to be red. So let's take a look. We've got a block quote, right? We had a block quote on our page. Now it's got this pretty ugly yellow markup, and maybe we don't want that yellow markup, so we can change that. Or what we could do is we could create one. Well, let's go ahead and change that, and we will change what the block quote does. Let's change the block quote size. So sometimes it could be, instead of having this be the same size of the text, maybe we want to pop up the size just a bit. Alright, so I'm going to go down below my heading tags, and I'm going to choose to change the element block quote. Now I don't need those angle brackets, I just need the name of the selector. but I do need my style brackets, open and close. Just by habit, I always create them both, give myself some space, and then I start working on it. So I can change the font size of my block quote. Generally speaking, the default font size for all websites is going to be 16 pixels. That's going to be important later when we are working with responsive HTML, but for now not so important. So let's make this font size 20 pixels, and that should really bump up the size noticeably. So here's I got my block quote highlighted, and there you go. It's just a little bit bigger anytime we use a block quote inside our page. Let's do links next. Up here at the very top of our document, you'll notice that it included our character set. You always have to have that. And Dreamweaver went ahead and put that in there for us when we created our new file. Now this next thing isn't required. It's only that this is called a comment in our style sheets. Now in HTML we did comments and they look like this. Comment goes here, right? That's how we do a comment in HTML. On our CSS page we do a / with an asterisk, and then we close it with an asterisk /. Now why is that important? Because I'm going to create a comment. So it's / asterisk, and just for styling here I'm going to go in all caps, call this link styles. I'm going to create a return, and then I've got this equal sign, and then I'm going to close it with an asterisk /. So this is all just a comment, but what I've done here is I've created a way for me to visually organize my styles, because eventually we're going to have a lot of styles and you're trying to browse and find styles that you've changed, and if you can create these little sort of comment section titles, then it helps you find them a little quicker. And you can also even do a command find and type in link styles and it drops you right there right away, if you're one of those people who know how to do that. Alright, but let's go ahead. We're going to change our links. By default, the web browser uses this blue. Alright, so I'm going to change that up a little bit. And these are called pseudo selectors. So we start off with our A link. And the very first thing we're going to change on our links is the color. And I'm going to go ahead and use, it's 996600. That's pretty ugly. FF9933 is kind of a gold, or FF9900. I think that's a gold that kind of matches what I have in my logo color. So I'm choosing that as my accent color. Now there's two colors that you should never use, or you should seldom use for links, red and green. A couple reasons for that. Psychologically, red means stop. So even if your web colors seem to include those colors, green and red, I would not use those for your link colors. The other reason why we don't use red and green is because there are people, supposedly 10% of the population, is colorblind to red and green. So they see those links as gray, and those gray links may not have enough contrast against the other text. Alright, so we have our link here, and we're going to do text decoration. We're going to set that to none. So normally links have an underline. By changing this to text decoration to none, it then will not have an underline. and we have font weight, and we'll set that to bold, just to make it stand out a little bit better. So let's refresh that. Here we have all our links. Let's see what happens. And there we go. So these now have links. Now, as you hover over them, I still get the mouse, but there are other things I would prefer this to do to let people know that these are all links. I think this is standing out a little bit better. And I think if I had a light gray background, you'd be able to see them a little better against the white, which eventually we'll do, not this lesson, but in future lessons. So that's just one state of our link. That's the first time we ever see it on our page. We also have a state called visited. So if I've visited a website, I can change the color. And if I didn't set the website color, then it's just going to have the same color as before. So I could have FF99, let's go 66, let's see if that's, so this is what it looks brighter, and this is going to be a little duller than when you first visited it. And that's a good strategy. Use a similar color, but one that looks a little bit faded. See how bright that one is compared to this color? And if you need to find a way to pick those colors, you might want to try to do that in Photoshop. It's a little, you can do it in Dreamweaver, it's just a little trickier. And that's really the only thing. So if somebody's been to a web page and have clicked on a link, the next time they see that link, it's going to take on this color. And that just lets them know that they've already visited that page. We have another link state called focus. This won't show up unless unless somebody's using a machine that tabs through all the links. So if somebody has a physical impairment that disallows them to use a mouse, or it's hard to use a mouse, I mean, we're used to hovering a mouse and then clicking on a link. Some people may not be able to use a mouse because of some physical impairment. They don't have the proper use of their hands, and so they tab between links. And when they get to the link that they want to click, it's going to set the focus, if that makes sense. So we do want to set this. I'm going to change this to dark black, or I could change it to the 222 since that matches our color scheme a little bit better. That's not one I'm going to be able to show you how it works, but it's one you should set. And I usually set the focus to the same thing as hover, because you're essentially doing the same thing. You are about to click on the link, and so you get some evidence that this is going to do something. So on our hover, which is a mouse action, it's going to hover over to a darker gray. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like now. Hit refresh. So when I hover over a link, it turns to the darker color. So that just gives people an indication that something's going to happen with the link. Now if I wanted to do a little bit more evidence that this is a link, I could add back the underline. And let's go ahead and underline. And I'll go ahead and also do that for the focus. So if I refresh this, it now also underlines as I hover. Just gives it more indication that it's a link and it's going to do something if they click. But they haven't clicked yet, they've only hovered or tabbed over to it. We have one more for the actual link, or the click, and it's going to be called active. And I don't know if I really care what this one does. Let's go back with the same color as the visited. So as they click on it, it will, oops, I got to put color FF9966. So as they do click on it, it'll change color. So I save that, I'll hit refresh. So I'm clicking over, and then as I click, watch what happens, the color changes to that yellow. Now, since I'm on the About page, it's just going to keep me there. Okay? And those are the 5 states of a link or style. So you're always going to have at least one set of link styles set for your website. And I say at least one because you may have others. On some web pages, there will be a link color strategy for internal content. And then sometimes for, say, the main navigation or the footer navigation, you might have different colors. Especially if you have a footer or a navigation with light text on a dark background, which is pretty common. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to change a style, or create what's called a class, a custom class. Alright, and we're going to apply it to one of our sections. Now we don't want to apply it to all sections, so I'm not going to call it out. I'm not going to call it out as a as an element, because then it would change all of the sections. I just want to change one section, and remember that was HTML markup. Let's go ahead and change this more about the character phyllo. By the way, I want to change line height as well. Let's go back and change line height, because this line height isn't looking very good. What did I like? Okay. Let's come back and change one more thing on body, because we had changed the color of everything. And we should also change the font family. Let's do that before we change a custom class. So we got font family. And for mine, I'm going to do Courier New. And I have that in single quotes. Mono space serif. So again, almost all computers have Courier New. If not, use its default monospace. If not, use the default serif font. And in this case, this creates a nice contrast, so you aren't using the same font type on the web page. Generally speaking, for web fonts, 2 is a good number. So having one for your headings and having another for your body is a really good strategy. And then your navigation links, eventually, you could choose either one of those 2 fonts. You can sometimes go to 3 fonts, but then it starts making your website look a little busy. So I would stick with 2 unless you got a really good reason to go to 3. Almost rarely would you ever go to 4. And it's just a little dull if you only have 1. Alright, so that's just a quick web typography lesson. So we got body, we got font family, and then let's go ahead and save. I'll show you what that looks like. So we had Times New Roman, that's the system default. I'm going to refresh, and now everything is Courier. Looks like a typewriter. Now, is that the world's best font? No, we'll change it later in the class, but for now it's not bad. It's different than Times New Roman, at least. And just for good measure, we're going to make sure that we have text align left. Some browsers like to center all the text. I think most of the modern browsers left align by default, but there are some older versions of Internet Explorer that will center all your text. And it looks terrible. It's very hard to read all centered text. So just to make sure, we're going to do text align left. Now let's change our line height. So line height is the distance we have here between our text. Now this isn't necessarily bad, but for me it's just a little tight. So I'm going to relax that just a little bit, and we do line height. And I'm going to go with, let's see, 24 pixels maybe. Yeah, I think that'll look good. So this will spread things out a little bit, just makes it a little easier to read. Didn't change it a whole lot, but in my opinion that is a lot easier on the eye with reading web fonts to just spread that out just a little bit. And you can also change your line height for your heading tags in case your, just in case your it ever wraps. What's it going to look like when it wraps? You can see here, this is pretty tight. So with a 30 pixels, I might want to relax that just a little bit. Let's see here, what's going to be a good line height? Let's go ahead and change that. We're going to introduce, if I do font size, I could do it per H1 tag, or I could do it, and the line height is going to be the distance between the baselines. So if I change line height, then we can practice this and see what we get. If I do 30 pixels, maybe I want 36. Let's just see what 36 does. So it's pretty much the same size as the font size. Hit refresh, and there's about Philo the webcomic, and that's pretty good line spacing. You can see right here. But my H2 tag, not so good. So let's go ahead and change that one as well. Line height. This would be like setting your leading on your print project. And for now I'm just going to use the same font size. And there's a little bit of padding in between even if I go, so it's not going to be the exact same size. And that looks good. Looks decent anyway. Nice thing about this font called Impact is that the descenders do not go down very low. And I'm trying to see, I don't have any descenders in that one. I don't really have any descenders in any of my text, but I write down here on tip jar, the P does not go down very far. So it's less likely that it's going to run into it. But that's what you're going to want to look for. If you have any descenders that are touching the letters below, then you're going to need to increase your line height. So there's no automatic line height for every font. It's going to depend upon the characteristics of its descenders, on how far those descenders reach down and maybe touch the text below. So the line height's going to start at the bottom, and then you just have to make sure that you like how it stacks when you have two lines of text. So that's line height. Important because if your words start looking jumbled on the page, then it doesn't look very good. So we've changed a few more things on the body text. Now we're going to come back and create a custom style. So here I have my comment tags for link styles. Let's copy that. I selected it all. Just click, drag, hold everything in Dreamweaver so I have it all selected. Then Command-C copies it. I'm going to go down to the very bottom of my style sheet and paste that. I'll replace the word link with custom styles. And I'm going to create a new, what's called a class. So to create a custom style, I need to start it with a dot. All right, notice all these other selectors don't have a dot because those are known elements, known selectors that we use in the world of HTML. So I'm going to create one that's just called red, and I'm going to use underscore red section. Let's just call it red section. We'll start our style and end it. And all I need to do is I can change pretty much any property and give it any value. I'm just going to change the color. And let's see, what's a good, let's go with like a brick red. And I don't use, make sure I write the right pound sign there. It's sort of like a brick red, 770000. So I've saved this style, but I haven't applied it. So here's how we apply a custom style to our HTML tag. Come back to our source. We said that there was a section. Let's do the main character. We were going to have this entire section be changed to red. Or I could apply it just to a single paragraph. Maybe that'll be easier since I've already got this as an ID. Let's just change the very first paragraph of this section. So by doing a custom class, I can add to my paragraph markup tag, I'm going to add the tag class. Then we do an equal sign with the double quotes. And then I have to use exactly the same name that I used for my style without the dot. So that's a little catch. You don't include the dot, but you do have to write this exactly. Uppercase matters. It was probably best that you didn't have any spaces or strange characters. So I'm going to copy that, come back to my source code. Here's my class to that paragraph, and I'll paste that as the value for this tag attribute. Simple as that. And I'm only applying it to this paragraph. If I had gone and changed all paragraphs to red, then all paragraphs are going to be red. I just want to change one. So the way to do that is to simply create a class, a custom style, and then apply that class to the element that you want to change. So hit save. Let's go take a look at what that looks like. Let's see, I think it was the very first paragraph under more about the character. So this paragraph here should change red on the refresh. And there we go. Not so obvious, but if you do look, it is red. If I wanted to make it more obvious, I certainly can change the class. Let's do font weight, and we'll change that to bold. Hit save. Now when I come back, you got it red and bold, and that's definitely a lot more obvious. And it applied it just to that paragraph. I can apply that same class to as many paragraphs or elements as I wanted to. If I wanted to just change a heading tag, one heading tag to red, I could do that. If I wanted to change just a few words, I would put it within a span tag. All right? And that's what we call a custom class. We can also do things with what's called a local style. But that's something we want to do very sparingly. So we did do that once. Where is it? Okay. So you'll notice we had these images before, and we had put in a tag for the style. We had put in these styles for those images. These are called local styles. So if I had created a style for images that set the float or margins, we would have an inline style that would override it. So the way cascading style works is your web page is going to look for styles on your CSS page first. Also in your HTML section, in the head tags, you can include page styles at the beginning. Actually, I don't even think you put it in the header. I think you maybe put it within the body. You would put styles, or what's called page styles, up at the top. And then, if you have styles inline, these are called local styles or inline styles, these would override any style you had in your style sheet. Right, so that's the order in which everything goes with cascading style sheet. And then if you did your reading, there's a way you can apply the important attribute. You call it an attribute. You can tag it with important, and then it definitely is going to override anything that you have set anywhere else. So that's the order of the cascading style sheets as well. So it's important to know that when you're styling, everything is in the correct order. So right now, all your text is going to be 444, but then down here, when we applied a custom style, it'll change it to this red. And that's because we did the style sheets in that order. And it also matters if the H tags are nested inside a body tag. Almost everything that you do is going to be nested inside your body tags, because that's how you pretty much start your page. After your head, then everything is inside your body tags all the way down to the bottom. Can you apply styles to HTML? Yes, but do so sparingly, because your head is also inside your HTML tag, and it probably won't affect anything in your head tags. It's probably pretty safe. But if you need to have something that visually applies to everything, it's probably easiest to style it in your body. And that's also why when we do our style sheets, body is almost always the first element that we style. And then we can have all of the regular elements after that be styled, including our links. And we'll be adding more styles later throughout the class. This is just our first introduction to style sheets. I'm just going to make sure I'm covering everything that you're going to need to know for the project. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Now, certainly as you're working on your project, you're going to continue to work on the files that you already started in Module 2. So you'll want to make sure that you've got all of your code up to speed in Module 2. If you don't, take the time to finish that up. You certainly can't apply styles to something that isn't there or isn't coded correctly. So you'll want to make sure that that's all tightened up. Let's see. Done that. We've done links, all 5 states. You can always test your pages. And we embedded the style sheet. Yep, I think you got everything you need for the first in-class exercise on cascading style sheets. So good luck on your project, and hope you enjoyed it. And we still got a ways to go before this starts looking more like a website. Next module, things start to take shape a little bit better, but you're starting to learn how to apply things that change color, change font, change a little bit of size, and maybe even a little bit of alignment as far as aligning things left or right. We definitely learned about link styles. That's something you're going to use all the time. So that's also very good to know. All right, and that's your first lesson in CSS.